record. All right. So I want to introduce you guys to Lou. Lou is the other bearded fellow. He's in my top left corner. I don't know where he is on your screen. But this month, our theme, our topic is the sacrament of confirmation. Because believe it or not, after receiving the sacrament, we want to keep learning about its graces and its power in our life. And Lou, it is very providential that the gospel today is the parable of the talents. The mass reading is very providential. I heard it at mass this morning. I was like, wow. So talking about those talents that are poured into our lives, those graces that are poured into our lives, and how we can't bury them in the backyard. We are called to share them. So before Lou starts, I would encourage you at the top right of your screen, if you change your view to speaker view, and I am going to mute, and Lou, I'm going to let you take it away, brother.
Okay, I hope I can live up to, oh, of course the phone's ringing. My wife will get that. Hope I can live up to the introduction, but I want to first of all kind of preface the talk by saying I usually talk to 10th graders, you know, in confirmation class and their parents, and I am a transplant from Massachusetts, and you know, they're still 10th grade, and I know that now in New Hampshire, confirmation is received in earlier grades, so I hope you'll bear with me. This talk is, as Adam said, for parents, and I hope you'll find something in it of value, regardless of the grade your child is in. And it is a discussion of the first 6 chapters of the confirmation book we'll be using for grades 5 through 12. So I will start. Confirmation is the sacrament of initiation. It is one of 3. It is baptism, Eucharist, and confirmation. And these are sacraments that bring us into a relationship with Christ and the church. And they're very important because they are the foundation of our Christian life. And they give us a sense of belonging into our, you know, family of faith. But the sacrament of confirmation, which is receiving an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, is in close relationship to baptism, in that it continues to strengthen us with the graces that God bestowed on us at baptism, but no longer as a baby. I mean, that baptism is the first sacrament where we're babies and basically in the Catholic Church. So now you receive confirmation as a young adult. And in a sense, it is that confirmation is a spiritual growing up. And in the ceremony of confirmation, the bishop traces the sign of the cross on the person's forehead. And, you know, after having first dipped his thumb in holy oil or chrism, and he will say, "Be sealed with the gifts of the Holy Spirit." And the newly confirmed will respond by saying, "Amen." But it's important. These gifts of the Holy Spirit, I mean, they're a blessing. And there are 7 gifts. It's wisdom, understanding, counsel, knowledge, fortitude, piety, and fear of the Lord. And these gifts give the newly confirmed, I don't know how to, a new strength to go beyond themselves, to go into a deeper relationship with Jesus and the church and really the world around us. And, you know, it's a great blessing, but it's important to know that as much as these gifts are a blessing, they must be developed and cultivated. It isn't something that you receive and good to go. And, you know, for this, I kind of use an analogy. It might be a bad analogy, but I've used it for years. It's sort of like having a very powerful race car that you don't know how to drive. It's like you're at the start line, you have the car, you know how to start it, but you lack the instruction on how to drive it in a race. And confirmation prepares us. It gives us instruction to go forward in developing our Christian faith. And when you receive confirmation, again, you're still a novice, but you're kind of on the road. You're aware and you're ready for life's race. And I know what I'm going to say next may sound a little strong, and I'm going to explain it, but how we develop these gifts in the newly confirmed to a very large extent determines how they will live their lives. And the reason I say this is there are scientific studies showing how spirituality affects our brain. I mean, it is a branch of neuroscience called neurotheology. It is well established. It's been for over 40 years. There are, again, many specialists, there are many leaders in the field. And the effects we're talking about is what, of course, what we've always heard, very positive effects, very strong feelings and emotions, feelings that change our life. And I'm not going to go any more into this. I just want you to know it's there. I mean, you can Google it. I recommend Google neurotheology and get ready to be seated for a while if you really have an interest, because you're going to get a lot of information. But I'm just another source I use is like Amazon Books. If you go to Amazon, to the book section, and you type in neurotheology, you're going to get a flood of books to read. But I just want to give you a few of the titles just to give you a flavor for what I'm talking about and what it's like. So this is the first book, Neurotheology, the science, how science can enlighten us about spirituality. The God-shaped brain, how changing your view of God transforms your life. How God changes your brain, and breakthrough findings from leading neuroscientists. And again, I won't go into it any further, but the reason I mention it here is because I believe that knowing that our relationship with God, how it changes our brain in very positive ways, is very important. It's real and it's measurable. It affects our lives, but it affects our children's lives. And that's what this is about. That's what we're here for. So in knowing that that is true, it's studied, it's studied, it's a science, it's a graduate course at colleges. I mean, the question comes, what is missing if we don't have a meaningful relationship with God? So if one says yes, I mean, are there consequences? And years ago in confirmation class, we used to talk about a longing or a feeling in our lives that we couldn't quite explain. Some described it as an empty feeling, something like, something's missing, but, we don't know what. And in confirmation class, we would describe it as something that God does understand. We would describe it as a longing or a feeling that he put in us so that we would find him, so that we would search for him. And we talked about it as an emptiness that only his love for us could fill. Again, consequences, two sides to this. If we fill this longing with God and our faith, we find that it gives us meaning, purpose. We have strength, when we need it most, or at least it seems that we do, but we have a general feeling that life is good. And it's not because we have all the stuff that we want, or that we don't have our trials and tribulations and illnesses and everything that happens, but it's because we understand life's meaning on a deeper level. We know in our soul that there's more, and that when we close our eyes for the last time, it isn't over. As Father Vaughn has often said, and I love this, the best is yet to come. If we don't feel this longing with God and with faith, what happens? And, we know we can become sort of lost. It's like we're on an endless search for who we are without even knowing that that's what we're doing. I mean, not even understanding it, being on a search for who are we? What is our purpose? What is our meaning? And oftentimes it's followed with very real feelings of depression and loneliness and emptiness. So, what do we fill this emptiness with if we don't find God? And you can imagine, I mean, drugs, alcohol, whatever addiction that, we choose. I don't like talking about it, but it's kind of like, get all that you can any way you can, because it doesn't matter. Who do you hurt? Whatever. I mean, just get whatever makes you happy today, because that's all there is. It's kind of, there is no best is yet to come. And we see that. And I won't go into it in any more detail. I'll tell a quick thing. I was on the CDC website. It was a couple of months ago, and I was looking at something, and I noticed suicide rates. And I wasn't looking for it, but it was surprising. I mean, suicide from 1999 to 2018 is up 35%. I mean, that's shocking. The 10th leading cause of death at all ages is suicide. I mean, that's epidemic. And it's something these last 2 years, especially with what's been going on with this pandemic, it's only made it worse. And it isn't that I want to dwell on these things, but I just think it's important to be aware of this as parents. I mean, it helps us steer our children in a better direction. As the book says, and I love the way the book puts this, confirmation is a unique opportunity to discover God, to open your heart to him, and to let him come close right up next to you. And that's what we want to give our children. We want them to have that feeling. That's what confirmation preparation is about. It's about filling the emptiness with the right stuff, kind of being on the right road to do it. And it's not a short race, it is a marathon. And the book talks about confirmation as a marathon. And, we go through preparation, we receive confirmation, and don't think of when we receive confirmation that we're at the finish line. It really is that we're just at the starting line. I mean, this is where I say these gifts need to be developed. They need to be nurtured in our children. So I won't go on longer. The next topic in the book talks about what can we know about God? Does God exist? Or is God merely an invention? And, all we have to do is look around. We see atheism kind of taking over our country, if not the world. I mean, prayer has been taken out of schools and most public gatherings. I mean, the Ten Commandments has been removed from public buildings. The fact that our country was founded on religious principles no longer matters. I mean, George Washington, our first president, when he was inaugurated, first of all, he declared the day a national day of prayer. He was inaugurated in New York. That was the capital at the time. It was Federal Hall, right on Wall Street. And after the inauguration, they all walked down to St. Paul's Chapel or church, and all of Congress and George Washington, they were all on their knees. And George Washington dedicated this country to God. And there is a plaque at St. Paul's today, you can see, to that commemoration. I mean, it was very historic. And another thing I'll mention about St. Paul's is technically on the grounds that we call ground zero of the 9/11 attacks. I mean, it is right there. And I won't go into this at all, but I mean, many people feel that we were attacked on holy ground. I mean, it's just something that people think about. But, today it's all changed. Many wonder if there even is a God, or is it something that was made up, invented to keep ancient people in line, right? So, how do we talk to our kids about God? And the book talks about the idea that could there be something from nothing? In other words, could all of this just have happened? Could the universe and everything in it have come from nothing? And I won't go into great detail, but the bottom line is there is a reason for everything that exists, from a microbe to the moon. I mean, everything has a purpose. And take one of those things out and see what happens. See the imbalance. But the idea of a world in which everything has a reason and a purpose, except for the world itself, I mean, that would strike most anybody as nonsense. And when we normally look to see God in the Bible, when we talk to our kids, we point to different stories that are in there about miraculous things. But, kids have gone through this in confirmation. That's great. But what's God doing today? It's almost like that's an ancient book. And I don't want to say it that way, but, they almost make you feel that way. So looking for God in the world today, there are things in plain sight. And if we just look for them, we often overlook them, and we kind of don't pay attention. So God does kind of leave a trail kind of for us to follow, to help us with our faith. And I'm going to go into a couple of those things, actually a few of those things, but not in great detail. The first thing I want to talk about is the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is the actual burial cloth of Jesus. It had been around. We knew the tomb was empty. It was taken. It had been around. It was something that made its way actually to royalty. It was in history, you'll see that it was displayed at royal weddings and things. And then in the the Middle Ages, it kind of disappeared. It went underground. Some think the Knights of Templar had it or whatever, but it resurfaced in 1578. I'm not going to talk any more about it. I just want to read a paragraph that does it justice, much more so than I could do. The Shroud of Turin is an ancient linen cloth, 14 feet by 4 feet. It is hailed as the genuine burial garment of Jesus. It supposedly contains the very image of Jesus burnt into the cloth by means of radiation created at his resurrection. The proponents of the shroud claim the image stands up to 20th century analysis as being humanly impossible to fake or duplicate. It is hailed as the 20th century proof of the resurrection through scientific examination. I mean, this shroud, at one point, it was open for 2 or 3 weeks to scientists from all over the world, and they all came in, and they all had their different point that they wanted to examine it from and see and prove, and they can't explain any of it. I mean, it has passed scientific rigor. It's just, it's one of those things that you almost say it can't exist, but it does. And I believe it's there to help us with our faith. And again, something to look into if you weren't aware of the Shroud of Turin. That is Turin, Italy, where it is kept. The Tilma of Juan Diego. And that is the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. This is a fascinating story. I mean, it is a story of the conquistadors from Spain coming in and conquering the people of Mexico, and the Mexican people having been destroyed, being so distraught. I mean, they were ready for the sky to fall in on them. They thought life was over as anything they knew. And there was conversion. I mean, Catholicism did come to Mexico, and one person who was converted was Juan Diego. And he was walking through the hills, and the Blessed Mother showed herself to Juan Diego, and they had a conversation. And in the conversation, the Blessed Mother said, I would like a church built on this spot. And Juan Diego said, well, I'll go to the bishop. And he did. And the bishop was very welcoming. And he told the bishop, you know, this is my conversation. This is what the Blessed Mother said. And she would like a church built on the spot. And Juan Diego was told by the bishop, well, I understand what you're saying, but it isn't up to me. I need something, some proof, something I can go to the higher up so that we can get this done. So Juan Diego understood, and he went, and he, in his next conversation with the Blessed Mother, and again, you've got to read the story. This is a synopsis, but he said to the Blessed Mother, the bishop asked that we could give him some proof so that we could get this done, so he would know that he could give to his higher up, so to speak. So she said, okay. And she said, here are flowers. And of course, flowers where they weren't supposed to be. But she said, pick these flowers and take them up in your tilma and show them to the bishop, and he will understand. And a tilma is a cloak. It's something in Mexican, you know, years ago, you'd see it was worn over the shoulder, but it was a cloak that would keep them warm in the fields. But he gathered up all these flowers, and he went to the bishop, and he said, the Blessed Mother said that showing you this will give you the proof that you need. And he let his cloak go, and all of the flowers fell to the floor. But on his cloak was the image of the Blessed Mother, but Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it's, again, scientifically, it has met scientific rigor. It isn't that they don't know anything about the image. They don't even know how the image got on there. They don't know what it is. It's not painted. It's not, I mean, they have no clue. And this is something, it is in Mexico City. And the image itself was so miraculous. I mean, there were images within the image that the Mexican people of that time understood, I'm sorry. And looking at it, they knew this was truly God. And it caused like the biggest conversion maybe ever in the world. I mean, all of Mexico's, Central America, I mean, they became Catholic. I mean, they believed, they understood God now, and they had their life back. They got it. I know I'm going on about it, but it is such a beautiful story. And again, something that shouldn't exist. And with a wonderful story, if you went through it with the kids, to show them God in the world today. And, you know, we're talking about sightings of the Blessed Mother. And there are many sightings. And these sightings kind of are visited every year. And they bring strength and reconciliation to thousands, tens of thousands. I don't know how many Catholics each year as they visit these sites. And I'm going to go over just a few of them, just to give you a feel for it. And the first one, of course, I just mentioned, Our Lady of Guadalupe, which was 1531. And there's something I want to mention there. The Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe is the most visited Catholic pilgrimage in the world. I actually thought it was the Vatican. It is this site that is the most visited in the world. It is the world's third most visited sacred site. I mean, this is something that is just so beautiful. Our Lady of La Salette, 1846. Our Lady of Lourdes, 1858. Our Lady of Fatima, 1917. Our Lady of Garabandal, which is in Spain, 1961 to 1965. Our Lady of Medjugorje, 1981 to present. And I say present because there are still miracles happening there to this very day. And you can find out about them. I invite everyone, Google today's miracles and see what comes up. And if you really have an interest and you want to see, expect to stay hours. I mean, you will be overwhelmed. We think God doesn't want us to find him. I mean, it's there. He is here today in our world. And one last thing I want to talk about, and it'll be my final, I promise, but it's a study that something that fascinated me in 1975. Maybe I was a little low on faith and needed a little buildup, but at the time, medical science was getting very advanced and people would die. But now suddenly medical science was bringing people back and they were talking about things that they saw. And we know this as near-death experiences. And it was very interesting. I mean, they would hear conversations in other rooms that they couldn't have because they were dead, but yet things started getting documented. Universities started studying this. And I just want to talk about one study in this because I think it is meaningful and meaningful to know. And so the largest study that has ever been done on this to date was done at the University of Southampton in England. And the University of Southampton is one of the top 100 universities in the world. It is a very prestigious school. Like Harvard, it's got about 20,000 students. Again, the study was begun in 2008. It lasted until 2014. It involved 15 hospitals in the UK, the USA, and Austria. There were 2,060 cardiac arrests that were recorded and 330 patients survived. Kind of a sad statistic. But to be eligible, patients had to go through extreme scientific rigor. And they didn't know it, but this is how it was set up. To be science, to come to absolute conclusions, you've got to have absolute control. I mean, it had to be a heart attack. It had to be at a facility that could revive in a certain way. It had to be, there's so much more to this. If you start reading it, you're fascinated. But I'm not going to talk more about it other than the very last conclusion. I'll call it, in 2014, they printed their results. I'll call it their white paper, for lack of another word. But the very end of it, and I want to say they couldn't come to an absolute conclusion because they actually only had an incidence of 2%. And that was 2% of the 330 people that survived. So it only about 6 or 7 people, but they had absolute reason. You can read some of the cases. It's mind blowing. I mean, it's real. Make a long story short, here's the very end of the paper, and I promise I won't do any more studies. Thus, while it was not possible to absolutely prove the reality or meaning of patients' experiences and claims of awareness, and again, that was due to the low experience of 2%, their experience or awareness of explicit recall or visual awareness, also called OBEs or out-of-death experiences, it was impossible to disclaim them either, and more work is needed in this area. Clearly, the recalled experience surrounding death now merits further genuine investigation. And there's 2 more words, and these are the words that got me: without prejudice. I mean, we know who we are. I mean, all right, you went through a tunnel. Yeah, you saw a light at the end, right? Any unicorns there? I mean, we are skeptics. We are people, but I mean, without prejudice. This is a scientific study that is serious. And again, more studies are underway, but God reveals himself to us in many ways. And these are things for us to see and to learn about. They're not proof that God exists or that God is real. I mean, we don't need that, but they are things that help strengthen our faith. I mean, sometimes our faith batteries just get a little low, right? And it helps strengthen us. And it also helps us when we're talking to our children about God. These are signs of how God is working in our world today. And again, I want to emphasize that our relationship with God is by faith, and having complete trust and confidence in someone without having absolute proof is what faith is. But I do think it's nice that God understands us and understands our sometimes needing a little charge in our faith batteries. And it's kind of like he allows us to look behind the curtain, kind of get a little glimpse, if you will, of eternity in some ways. And it's something that we could be aware of by keeping our heart open to him and his love, and looking around and doing things like Googling, today's miracles on the internet and things like that. So I won't go into more detail on this. The next section of the book asks the question: if God is so good, why is the world broken? So why don't we live in a perfect world? I mean, if God is all powerful and all knowing, why isn't everything perfect? I mean, what happened to paradise, right? So I often ask the question when I was teaching confirmation classes, when we were created, was God looking to create robots that would follow his every command immediately and perfectly? I mean, was he creating servants that would, just attend to his every need? And of course, the answer is no. I mean, God was creating beings that he could be in a loving relationship with, beings that would love him, not because he commanded them to, but because they truly wanted to love him. Beings that would choose by their own free will to have a loving relationship with God, knowing how much he loves us. And God gave us that free will to choose. He doesn't force us, but that free will, it also comes, with our ability to be stubborn, self-serving, of course, self-centered. It's about me, right? We don't do the things we intend to do. We sin and we wonder why did we do that? And St. Paul, I think, puts it best. I don't do the good I want to do, but instead I do the bad things I don't want to do. And it is all part of our free will. We didn't come with an operations manual. We kind of learn as we go. And even then, we don't always get it right. So that's kind of what finding God and living in his graces, that it's why it is so important. And of course, that is what confirmation is about. Why is the world so messed up? I don't know. Because so many people never find God, be it in their own religion or anywhere else. I mean, many never even look for God, and left to our own broken ways, our own devices. I mean, you don't have to look far to see what we get. I mean, it is a broken world. I mean, it is a messed up world. But, in the book, the story of Adam and Eve, and there's other stories, and they do a much better job than I have of explaining it and, what I'm trying to say. But looking at the story of Adam and Eve, again, it is a story of paradise and our compulsion not to trust. And the book does a great job on this. It is a story of original sin, of our fall from grace and paradise lost. And it is that type of chapter. I won't go into any more detail of it, but our free will, yeah, we're allowed to use it, not always for the best thing. So that's kind of the messed up world. So the next section is about the coming of Jesus. God becomes man. And that's one of the biggest fascinations. I mean, a lot of people have trouble thinking that God would really become human. I mean, being born, going through being a helpless baby, going through puberty and young adulthood. I mean, did he have friends? Did he play the way other children played? Did he fall down and scrape his knee? And I know that these sound like silly things to ask, but they are valid questions. I mean, was he truly human, but truly God? And of course, the answer is yes. I mean, Jesus was truly human in every way, but sin. I mean, he had a sense of humor. I mean, he was a man of great sorrows. But I always think of this story, and it's always, we are like we're all perfect, right? And our neighbors, well, a jerk. Somebody's got to straighten that one out. We got to. And Jesus put it so well. I mean, you know, before we go after the splinter in our neighbor's eye, we ought to get that log out of our eye. I mean, it's a sense of humor. I mean, there are other things that you could see that side of Jesus. And again, Jesus was he had very deep feelings. I mean, he was real. I mean, look at Lazarus. I mean, he knew that he was going to raise Lazarus, but when he was coming, and one of the sisters came out to him, and it was Jesus. If you were only there, if you were in her pain, and Jesus felt that, and the other sister, he felt the pain, and coming to the house, it was awake. I mean, he could feel everyone's heart, and he wept. He cried just like we would have. I mean, you go to a wake, it's just, we know that Jesus did that. Did Jesus love like a human? I mean, he loved us to the point of death. We know that he loved. He felt pain, he bled, and he died just as we do. And we know that. So why did Jesus come to the world when he did, though? I mean, at that time, wasn't God kind of really upset with Israel? I mean, wasn't he, about to destroy it? I mean, it was only a very short time after the death of Jesus that Israel got totally destroyed as a nation. And it didn't come together again until after World War II. I mean, that's about 2,000 years. So again, why did Jesus come then? And the reason is that God so loved us that he wanted us to have a new relationship, a new covenant, one that was personal and intimate, a covenant that was filled with his divine love, his mercy, his forgiveness for us, a completely new start without sin. And we'll talk more about without sin in the next chapter, but Jesus used many great signs and miracles to help show us that new covenant, miracles that could only come from God. I mean, raising the dead, feeding 5,000, healing the sick. But yet, as a man, he was one of us. We could relate to Jesus on an entirely personal level. So when we ask, was Jesus truly human and truly God? I always think of something that is kind of stayed with me, and I haven't seen it in books, but in the garden after the Last Supper, Jesus was praying so fervently. I mean, he knew what was about to happen. And he said to God, if there is any other way this could be done to take this from me? And that's truly human. But knowing there was no other way, he accepted his faith. He stood in silence and let it be done to him. And that's truly God. So Jesus, and I want to make this clear because sometimes I talk about it and it's like Jesus is half God and half man. Jesus was 100% God. Jesus was 100% man without the sin, of course, and it was in perfect unison. And it is a mystery. I mean, I don't think it's part of the mystery of the Trinity, but I consider it that way. I mean, perfect unison, 100% God and 100% man. So again, he came, he was man, he was God, and God, he showed us the new covenant. He showed us the miracles. I mean, Jesus gave us now in the new covenant a God that was no longer sort of distant or mysterious, but now a God that we called Father. And it isn't that we didn't use the term Father, like even in the Old Testament, it was like Father of our nation, the Father of our faith. But when Jesus talked about God as Father, I'll use this example. When the apostles asked Jesus to teach them how to pray, he taught them the Our Father. And they were shocked, if not surprised, when they heard Father, Abba, Daddy. I mean, this is a new relationship. And it was part of the reason the Jews hated them the way they did. How dare he talk about a relationship with God, El Elyon, I mean, there were so many names for it. How dare he talk about a relationship like that with God? I mean, it was revolutionary. It was beyond belief. But again, I will leave it there. Man, yes. Yet God, yes. Okay. In our next chapter, we talk about why did Jesus have to die? And we just talked about Jesus, the new covenant that he brought us, that only God could bring us, our new relationship with God the Father, right? And it all looks good. So why did he have to die? And this kind of always reminds me of a story. And it's a story I've used. It's been around. It's for quite some time. You've probably heard it, but it makes the point. And I'm going to read it here. I hope you'll bear with me. So there was once a little boy who had a bad temper. His father gave him a bag of nails and told him that every time he lost his temper, he must hammer a nail into the back of the fence. Well, the first day, the boy had driven 37 nails into the fence. And over the next few weeks, he learned to control his anger. And the number of nails hammered in daily gradually dwindled down. He discovered that it was easier to hold his temper than to drive those nails into the fence. So finally, the day came when the boy didn't lose his temper at all. And he told his father about it. And his father suggested that the boy now pull one nail out each day as he was, at each day that he was able to hold his temper. I'm sorry, I'm not good at reading. The days passed, and the young boy was finally able to tell his father that all the nails were gone. His father took his son by the hand and led him to the fence. And he said, "You have done well, my son. But look at the holes in the fence. The fence will never be the same. And when you say things in anger, they leave scars just like this. And again, the point is that sin does leave scars. Even though God can forgive us and, we can kind of forgive each other for the harm we do to each other, the wounds are still there. I mean, in this case, what we're talking about, I mean, the sins of the world left deep, ugly scars, and they stood in the face of the new covenant. They were the sins of all the hatred, all the crimes, all the evil, all the unlove that ever darkened the earth. And they needed to be paid for before there could be any new beginning. I mean, no one on earth was worthy to pay for the sins. No one could. But again, before the new covenant, there had to be redemption, total new freedom. So, in God's infinite love for us, He came Himself in person to pay for those sins. Jesus, who didn't know sin, became sin so that we could have a fully renewed and restored relationship with God. And so He died for us. He died for our sins. And that's why Jesus had to die. And again, that was part of being man. Man died for man's sins, but yet it was God. Again, I won't go on more. Finally, we have the good news of the resurrection. It is extremely good news, but you have to put yourself in the view of the apostles and the world at that time. And, all they knew was it was over, right? 3 years with the best thing that ever happened to Israel. And now it's over in just one day. All the hopes, all the dreams, the new existence with God, our new relationship, kind of over in a flash. I mean, Jesus, the Savior, right? Jesus, the teacher, the miracle worker, Jesus, the master, gone. And, as the book says, it wasn't that Jesus was just gone. It was as if all the wickedness and all the evil in the world had gathered together during those dark days to wipe out love itself. I mean, it was as if Satan had planned this himself, and finally he could wipe out and destroy love itself. I mean, even Peter, who Jesus called his rock, the rock upon which I will build my church, denied Jesus 3 times. The apostles, the men that Jesus spent 3 intimate years with, ran and hid. They thought they would be next. At the very height when all was lost and destruction and misery had overtaken them, something happened. And it was something no one had expected. I mean, Jesus came back to them. They knew the tomb was empty, but they never expected anything like this. Was it really Jesus? Was it him or was it a ghost? I mean, even in the Bible, it tells the apostles were terrified when they first saw the risen Jesus. I mean, but Jesus calmed them. He blessed them. He showed them that he was flesh and blood. He showed them his wounds. He pointed to them and we know let them touch him. I mean, he ate a piece of baked fish just to prove. I mean, he was hungry. He was a man. It was really him. It was flesh and blood. And we know the apostle Thomas was not in the room the first time Jesus appeared. And he didn't believe. But when he saw Jesus for himself and he touched the wounds, he declared of Jesus, my Lord and my God. And I always look at that and I think, would I have believed without seeing? I mean, would I have had to touch the wounds of Jesus? I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, it is kind of who we are. I mean, Jesus was alive and with them for 40 days, okay, before he was lifted up into heaven. And as St. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians, he appeared to more than 500 at once, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. And when St. Paul wrote that letter, it was read and meant to be read in that time period. I mean, he wrote it in a very matter-of-fact way. I mean, there were no doubts. And he wrote to people who knew it was true. I mean, perhaps some of the people knew people who were present on that day when, Jesus was present in front of 500. I mean, there are doubts, people, oh, a resurrection. I had a friend of mine and he is Islamic and a very, very nice guy, but it was what he was always taught. And he said to me, that the crucifixion and resurrection was a lie, right? And I was like, I don't know why you would say that, but if that were true, then my faith has no meaning. then that was, that is it. I mean, but people try to discredit this. And, it was something, the book does a much better job of me. I mean, the takeaway is that people weren't building a faith, a religion, a new way of life, something they were willing to die for. They weren't building it on a lie. They knew the resurrected Jesus. The message of resurrection is that there's more. What we said earlier, right? The best is yet to come. And if we believe, I mean, it is the most powerful message that the world has ever received. And within 30 years of Jesus' death, the new religion of Christianity had reached almost the entire ancient Roman world, including the capital of Rome. And the new Jews, I'm sorry, the new Jews, listen to me, the new Jesus followers were not well liked. I mean, Rome had its emperor, and he thought of himself as a god. Rome had their own gods. And now you have these Christians, talking about one God, talking about a new way, a new life. And we know that they were killed violently and persecuted and tortured for their beliefs and the beliefs that they spread. And what happened to Christianity? It grew all the stronger. I mean, Jesus' followers were written about in many ancient history books, and they were history books of that day by well-known historians such as Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger, and others. I mean, these writings were mostly about the Jesus followers and the trouble they were causing, and it was all very real. I mean, it wasn't a myth that some would have us believe today. The history is there. I mean, Christianity became so powerful and so, I don't know, I lack the words, but in the year 380, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. The empire that was killing them now was their official religion. So Jesus not only gave us the new covenant, he conquered death and opened the way for us to eternal life. This is what confirmation is about. This is what we talk about. This is a parent's talk. We don't get into perhaps the drama and the detail that I do. I apologize. I appreciate you bearing with me, but I just wanted to give you a flavor for what the course is and what the book is like. And Adam, I will give it back to you. I hope it wasn't too bad.
No, that was absolutely wonderful, Lou. Thank you so much. And I know I wrote quite a few things down. So the book Lou was referring to is actually the book that we'll be using to help the young people prepare for confirmation in grades 5 through 12. So that older group, Lou and I will actually be working with on those Zoom meetings. So very excited to really take that step by step and really get into those details with that group. So let me stop